Allan Aguirre with your Incorruptible 2 minute warning. I'm going to be out of the office for the next couple of weeks. So today will be our fake Friday mode. Let me fix my collar. Hair and makeup, my video, my staff, my wardrobe grooming staff aren't here today. Uh, so normally on Friday is I go into this mode and we do like a Bible study about the theme of the week that I've been ranting about and raving about for 2 minutes. This week we've been talking about works. And since I won't be here for the rest of the week, we're going to do it today. It won't be very long because I don't know how long it's going to be. We're in James chapter 2. A lot of Christianity doesn't like these next. It's like 12 verses. It's not like, oh, I am abs. Oh, here, I just heard a little sound. Let me launch the chat for the like we normally do on Friday, just in case. You never know. So let me just say hello. Hello. There we go. Um, I am absolutely 1,000% opposed to standalone single verse um, theology doctrine. That's not how this works. You can't take a verse out of context and do anything with it. It's got to be contextual. Well, what I'm about to read is like 12 verses, and that's about as contextual as it gets. And it's James chapter 2. It starts off with, "My brothers, practice the faith." It talks about, not to be a respecter of persons. What else? It talks about, for example, verse 10, "For a person who keeps the whole Torah yet stumbles at one point has become guilty of breaking them all." And so people are anti-Torah people use that as a, so you that's why you can't keep the Torah. Well, that's not, you can't do that with one verse, because the next verse gives you an example of what he says. "For the one who said don't commit adultery also said don't murder. Now if you don't commit adultery but do murder, you have become a transgressor of the Torah." And that doesn't mean, in these two verses, it doesn't mean that you can't keep the Torah or not to keep the Torah. That's not what James is talking about. What he's talking about is, hey, you've got to keep the whole thing. You can't be a respecter of persons. That's what he's talking about. You got to love your neighbor. Okay, this is Christians, instead of looking for a way out of keeping God's commandments, you should be looking at how the ways of how to keep them. But a lot of people like doing that. They like they're always looking for a way out of being obedient. Um, so let me just read to you what's going on here. What good is it? I'm starting in verse 14. And here's the reason why most of Christendom doesn't like this, because they've been teaching you for at least since the Reformation, justification by faith and by faith alone, justification by faith only. That's not biblical, as we're about to see, and it's a total, you can't do that, and it's a total disservice, because that's where they come up with their whole concept of you're not justified by works, which is the exact opposite of what James, who would know, wrote and taught. And anyway, and keeping obedience, being obedient to God, is part of those works that justify you. For example, here, let's just read what James wrote here. "What good is it, my brothers, if someone claims to have faith but has no actions to prove it? Is such faith able to save him? Suppose, right? Is such faith able to save him? That's a loaded question. The answer would be no, as we're going to find out, which conflicts with the majority of your denominational uh, stance. Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food, and someone says to him, 'Shalom, keep warm and eat hearty,' without giving him what he needs. What good does it do? Thus, faith by itself, unaccompanied by actions, is dead. Faith without works is dead. But someone will say that you have faith and I have actions. Show me this faith of yours without the actions, and I will show you my faith by my actions. See, that's very, very important. You believe that God is one. Good for you. Yay. The demons believe it too. And the thought makes them shudder with fear. That's kind of a slap in the face right there by James, and a mic drop. You should be paying attention. But, foolish fellow, he's being kind there. I mean, he's basically calling you an idiot. Do you want to be shown that such faith apart from actions is barren? Wasn't Abraham declared righteous because of actions when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith worked with his actions. See, it's not one or the other. By the actions, the faith was made complete. And the passage of the Tanakh, the Old Testament, was fulfilled, which says, Abraham had faith in God, and it was credited to his account as righteousness. He was even called God's friend. You see that a person is declared righteous because of actions and not because of faith alone. Justification through faith only and faith alone is not biblical. Let me read that verse 24. I'm reading out of the Complete Jewish Bible, for example, just so that you know. But here's what verse 24 says in the English Standard Version. Elijah Ministries, that it's almost more of a distraction than a help. Your running commentary. Verse 24. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. So, since the Reformation, we've been taught justification by faith alone, whereas James is saying that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. It's okay, Elijah. So that's a complete different paradigm shift. Then it says in verse 25, likewise wasn't Rahab, the prostitute, also declared righteous because of actions when she welcomed the messengers and sent them out by another route. Indeed, just as the body without a spirit is dead, so too faith without actions is dead. And so what happens is, it's like, it's here's what they've done, Christianity has done, and they've done this for a long time. They throw the baby out with the bathwater because they're so terrified of the W word, the works word. They're so absolutely terrified of the word works. They come up with this absolute demonic perversion of what James actually taught. James is teaching justification through works and faith combined, right? Verse 24, not faith alone. Totally contradicts everything you've been taught, everything I was taught. So, how do we balance this out? Well, just what he says. Faith by itself, unaccompanied by actions, is dead. Your faith has to be accompanied by action. And this is where we're going to lose a lot of people, because they're so, right, once they've been taught a certain way, and they believe it's canon and they believe it's true, it's almost impossible to get them to change. It's almost impossible to get them to see that they're incorrect, even with the use of the Bible, or whatever. So, because Christianity was so absolutely fearful of works, justification by works, for example, right? Oh, we're not saved by works. Well, we're not talking about salvation. We're already saved, right? I believe, you're saved, I'm saved. Okay, so we got saved. Blood of the Lamb, only, it's not by works. We're not talking about salvation. We're talking about justification. Two different things. Salvation is how you come into this thing. Justification through faith and works, that balance, is how you stay in this thing. See? Because you can get saved and never do anything about that. And you're going to die in the vine. You'll be a branch that doesn't bear fruit. That's cut off and thrown in the fire. I didn't write that either. That's in John 15. So to be equipped, we need to have our faith balanced with the works of the good works that we were created for in Messiah. Remember, we talked about that. We were created for good works. It says in Revelation that we were granted, the word granted is being used there. We have been granted to clothe ourselves in white linen as a bride, right? The bride readies herself. So there's that. How do you ready yourself without working, without doing the works of justification? And then it says the bride is then granted to ready herself and to dress herself in fine white linen, which are what? The righteous deeds that we do. So the difference between church and bride, in a very elemental and a very basic way, the difference between the church and the bride is that the bride is actively preparing and readying herself for her bridegroom, for the bridegroom, by clothing herself with the fine linen of righteous deeds. The works that we're talking about here in James, the works that we were created for in Messiah, the works of obedience, the works of good works, right? Charitable works. You know, we've got a centurion. Sorry, this is the nose gremlin of live streaming. It's actually a thing. We have a centurion, a Roman centurion, who is visited by an angel. Okay, that already puts him in a league out, of his own. And the angel says, "Your charitable good works and prayers have become a monument in heaven before the throne." And some of you are going to say, "What are you talking about, Alan?" So that you don't think that I'm just making stuff up, because a lot of apparently people out there actually think I'm just making stuff up, and that when I do reference the Bible or Scripture, that I'm doing it incorrectly. I've got critics out there. I'm waiting for them to give me an invitation to their series and their books and their ministry. Yeah, that ain't gonna happen. Okay, there was a man I'm in Acts chapter 10. There was a man in Caesarea named Cornelius, a Roman army officer in what was called the Italian regiment. He was a devout man, a God-fearer. A God-fearer means a Gentile that kept Torah, as was his whole household. He gave generously to help the Jewish poor and prayed regularly to God, because he was doing the Shema. He was like what Daniel was doing. He's a Torah observant Gentile Italian regiment army officer. It's just mind blowing. And so one afternoon around 3 o'clock, he saw clearly in a vision, because he's praying, right, around 3 o'clock. He saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming in and saying to him, "Cornelius." And Cornelius stared at the angel, terrified. "What is it, sir?" he asked. "Your prayers," replied the angel, "and your acts of charity have gone up into God's presence, so that he has you on his mind." Now, that's the complete Jewish Bible. Let's see what it says in English Standard Version, because I think there was a word there. There it is. And he stared at him in terror and said, "What is it, Lord?" Verse 4. And he said to him, the angel said to Cornelius, "Your prayers and your alms, your giving to the poor and your prayers, right? You've been charitable to Jewish poor, and your prayers have ascended as a memorial before God." That is like freaking amazing. But if he had just been, a Christian, a nominal Christian, he probably wouldn't have been praying at the third hour, because he wouldn't be keeping Torah. Because Torah is what? The acts that prove that you're saved. How do you prove that you're saved? By obedience. That's what the New Testament teaches. Oh, you're saved, are you? Well, if you're saved, then you would be obedient. Don't lie, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't take the Lord's name in vain, love your neighbor as yourself, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, don't eat pork. If you see a bunch of little little birds on the ground, pick them up and put them in their nest. If you see your neighbor's cattle or whatever on the side of the road out of their pen, take it back and put it in the pen. Keep the feast, and above all, keep my Sabbaths. That's what God told Moses. See, those are the works That's how you're justified by works, because your works are works of obedience. You're I don't know. I don't understand how Christian. Well, well, let me correct myself. I do understand how Christianity doesn't get this, because they were told that the Torah wasn't applicable to them because they're Gentiles, and that's Jew stuff. And we don't want you to be we don't want anyone to think that you're a Jew by keeping the biblical Sabbath. So we're going to change the Sabbath so that no one confuses you to be a Jew, because that's a bad thing. That's how all this happened. It's historical. I didn't make that up. That's not just a conspiracy theory. That's an actual conspiracy. That's what actually happened. So they got rid of Torah. You're not supposed to do Torah as a Gentile believer. And so here we are, and especially after the reformation of Catholicism into Protestantism, we were taught justification through faith alone. I'm going with the Bible every freaking time. And I'm going with James, who's the leader of the church in Jerusalem that Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, submitted himself to. And James taught that it's justification through works, balanced with faith. It's justification through faith, balanced with works. How does the revelation of John on the island of Patmos define the end time church, the New Testament church in the end times? They have their faith and trust in Messiah, and they keep the Torah. Yeah. That's your 2-minute warning. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you. Elijah Ministries. That doesn't mean you have to stop interacting. Thank you. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. See you guys.
The views and opinions expressed during our broadcasts are solely those of the broadcast producers, hosts, and/or guests, etc., and are not necessarily the views or opinions of the Travelog Network, its sponsors, or affiliates.